Dying Light 2, one of my personal most anticipated games of this year and last year and the year before. But here we are, and I'm sorry this video took so long to get up, but there's a lot to do in this game and I wanted to do as much as possible. So this game was basically my life for the past 2 weeks. Now, I was a pretty big fan of the first game. I played it twice and I had just replayed it about a month ago to refresh my memory for Dying Light 2 and see all the changes and additions they made for this game. But first things first, I want to address the game's current state with bugs and everything, because that's a pretty big deal for games as of late, and I've been hearing a lot of mixed opinions on this for Dying Light 2. Now, personally, I hardly had any bugs, or hardly any big ones anyway, during my playthrough of the game, and I've heard some people say otherwise, but for me, it was pretty good. Of course, there's some of the small stuff, like people still squirming with their heads cut off or something funny like that. I did also have a few times where I'd get stuck in between objects, and there was one time where enemies I was fighting turned invisible, but that was literally it. I recorded every big bug I got, as you can see, and there was hardly any, like 2 or 3 at most. And I know it doesn't mean much, especially these days, but Techland has proven to be good at taking care of their games post-launch, because from what I understand, the first Dying Light was buggy on launch as well. But anyways, now that we've addressed that, Dying Light 2 does exactly what I feel a sequel should do, and most changes and additions were very beneficial for the game. Some may not have been that necessary, like the changes with the HUD and some of the skills, but most changes definitely made significant improvements. I was a bit iffy on the new system with the running and parkour with no sprint button, gradually gaining speed, and the floaty looking jumps, but it turned out to work really well. The parkour feels smooth and fluid. I still love the parkour from the first game, but I do think these changes made for an improvement. Another new addition was the parkour / climbing stamina. A lot of games do this now ever since Legend of Zelda. It's not entirely necessary for the game. The first game didn't have it and it was fine, but the change still works, especially with the new system for stamina and health levels. The skill tree is much larger and more expansive than the first game. There's a ton of new skills with parkour and combat, new moves, abilities. My only complaint with it is you have to unlock a lot of the same skills as well from the first game. I would have preferred if you started the game with the sliding and drop kicks, since those were skills you got very early on in the first game. You do start with the takedown though, so that's nice at least, since that was a late game skill in the first game as well. Which leads me to my favorite changes for Dying Light 2, and that's with the combat and stealth. Stealth was hardly an option in the first game. I suppose it was possible, but not very viable and extremely challenging to pull off. In this game, stealth is a much more viable option. It's still quite simple. It kind of reminds me a lot of the stealth system from the Far Cry series, with the detection system, knife takedowns, and you can also do chain takedowns, as well as aerial and ledge takedowns. It's a very simple and common system you see in a lot of open world games nowadays, but it's a definite improvement. The combat had some really nice changes as well. For one, being able to manually block and perform a parry was a great addition. Being able to do more parkour combat moves like the vault kick. The combat generally has more depth. A big thing as well is there's also no guns in this game. That was a pretty big part of the first game, and I am completely behind the idea of removing guns for Dying Light 2. The guns in the first game took away a lot of what I thought made Dying Light so unique. It turned a lot of the late game situations into a standard first-person shooter, which wasn't what made that game fun. All the different melee weapons and perks / upgrades you can make to them, and all the gore and brutality of the weapons made the melee weapons way more fun to use. They clearly understood this and heard some of the criticism from the first game and decided to remove guns entirely and create even more depth with the melee combat and weapons, along with all the different mods and upgrades you can add to them. Plus, they added an explanation into the story and lore as to why there are no guns in Villador. There was also the boomstick, which is kind of like an improvised shotgun that you can equip as some of your gadgets, but it breaks very easily and isn't something you can just abuse. I really enjoyed the new progression system with the inhibitors needed to upgrade your health, stamina, and immunity, which brings me to the new night cycle. The nighttime, like the first game, makes the world significantly more deadly and scary, except Techland wanted to make the advantages to playing at night more significant and encourage players to take the risk more. So rather than volatiles, there's now howlers who, if spot you, can start a 4-level chase, with virals and eventually volatiles chasing you if you let it progress that far. There's Forsaken stores and dark zones with all kinds of goodies to loot when the infected leave those areas at night, and of course the double XP. However, there's still risk. Nighttime is a very high risk, high reward scenario, because unlike the first game, in Dying Light 2, you're infected and you must stay human. Haha. And basically, whenever you're in the dark, your infection worsens, and if you don't step into light or UV lights or use an immunity booster, then you will turn and die. At first, this system can be a little frustrating and tedious, barely being able to loot a dark zone without having to run out to a UV light, but once you get upgrades that increase your immunity timer, along with boosters and UV shrooms, by the end of the game, I had so many boosters and immunity that I rarely paid it any mind. The new open world of Villador is definitely a highlight for me. There's 2 sections to it: the old Villador for the first act, and then the central loop, which is like the downtown area with all the skyscrapers. The world looks great visually, the colors, the design. I found it to be a way more interesting world compared to Haran from the first game. It's really well designed for the parkour. You can climb and jump to just about anything, and once you get to the central loop where everything is more spaced out, you get the paraglider, which is my favorite new tool to use. It adds another level to traversal that's really fun to use and get around the massive city with. The verticality and skyscrapers in the central loop with the paraglider really refresh the overall experience. It doesn't just look pretty either, it's jam-packed with side content. A huge variety of side quests, GRE anomalies, which are like little boss fights, and a numerous amount of parkour and combat challenges, windmills, and power stations you get to assign to the peacekeepers or survivors for different benefits. It's so much, it's a little overwhelming, but some of the side stories are really memorable with lots of dark twists. Not to mention the inclusion of choices gives everything a little more suspense and freedom with how you play. Now, if you've seen my videos before, you'd know I don't think all story games need choices. A lot of games have them now, and it's kind of annoying, honestly, and I don't think they're necessary. It's the Witcher 3 effect. Every game wants to be the Witcher 3 now. However, in the case of Dying Light 2, I don't think it needed choices, but I don't think it hurts the game either. There definitely aren't as many, and the choices don't have as much impact as, let's say, the ones in Witcher 3, but there's still a lot of pretty big choices to make. The story is decent. I really liked a lot of the big characters. Rosario Dawson as Lawan was great. The protagonist Aiden has a startling resemblance to Kyle Crane.
Hey, it's Crane. Now, I know you're headed for Dr. Camden, but his clinic's surrounded by zombies and Rise's thugs, so just let me come and help you.
Favor to ask you. You deliver this to Gary? It's on your way.
Yeah, that's not creepy at all. By the way, did you guys know Roger Craig Smith voices Kyle Crane, who also voiced my boy Ezio? But anyways, Aiden is definitely not the most interesting or engaging protagonist. He does feel a little stoic and generic. Again, kind of like how Kyle Crane was, except Aiden I feel has better motivations and more personal stakes that add a little weight to the story. He's looking for his long-lost sister that he was separated from when he was a kid, being experimented on by a GRE scientist named Waltz, the antagonist of the game. Again, Aiden's still not a great character, but I found his story compelling and it had me really engaged by the end. So he may not be the best protagonist by any means, but I think he had a little more depth to him than Crane from Dying Light 1. But overall, I'd recommend Dying Light 2 to you guys. There were some great changes made, specifically involving the world and gameplay, while still keeping what made the first game so fun and underrated to a lot of people. But let me know in the comments what you guys thought of Dying Light 2. Consider subscribing if you're new to the channel, and other than that, have a great rest of your day, everyone.